Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a good day. So we're looking in the book of Ruth at the moment. We're in the third week of our 4-week series, and today we're going to be looking together at Ruth chapter 3. For those of you maybe who missed the last couple of weeks or missed one of the weeks, let me just bring you up to date with the story. In Ruth chapter 1, we see the bitter providence that Naomi experienced. Naomi lost her husband. She lost both her sons. One of her daughter-in-laws then departed. And in the midst of all of that pain, Naomi couldn't see the sweet graces of God. She couldn't see the fact that she was able to return home to Bethlehem, the fact that Ruth went with her. She couldn't see these as positives. Just everything was darkness. Everything was cloudy. Everything was hopeless. And in Ruth chapter 2, last time we saw the mercy of God, the grace of God shining through, beginning to shine through like the sun beginning to pierce the clouds and beginning to shine through. We're introduced to a man called Boaz, a godly man of substance and wealth. And Ruth, we're told, she takes refuge under the wings of the Lord and is mercifully led to be able to glean in Boaz's field so that she's able to have plenty. And we see, particularly in Naomi, a wonderful change at the end of the chapter. In verse 20 of verse 1, she said to the women in Bethlehem, "Don't call me Naomi," which means pleasant. "Call me Mara," which means bitter, "for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." But in chapter 2, verse 20, she says to Ruth, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." The light of God's mercy, the light of God's grace beginning to shine through the clouds. John Piper said, "Seek refuge under the wings of God, even when everything seems to be shadow. And at the right time, God will let you look out from his eagle's nest onto some spectacular ravine." So let's move on now to Ruth chapter 3. Let's read it together, and then we'll look at the story and hopefully learn some helpful lessons from it. Verse 1 of Ruth 3. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But don't make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And Ruth replied, "All that you say, I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over. And behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, but there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And he said, bring the garment you are wearing, hold it out. So she held it and measured out. He measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. And then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did you fare, my daughter? And then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. She replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out for the man. The man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. There's a well-known saying that goes like this. Sow a thought, reap an act. Reap an act, sow a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. How true this is. Our thoughts shape our actions become our habits become our character, and our character will determine our destiny. I don't know about you, but my heart's desire and hope is that I will sow in such a way that I reap a godly destiny. And I don't want to leave it to chance. Nor do I want to sit back and say, God, make me a godly person. While I could never do it without him, it would be presumptuous of me in the extreme to demand it of him without any effort or trying on my part. I want to work in the power of the Holy Spirit to become increasingly like my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I want to pursue godliness, and I want to pursue it intentionally. And in Ruth chapter 3, we find 3 people planning, it seems to me, for intentional godliness. 3 people actively pursuing it. When I talk about godliness, I mean both character, but also a willingness to follow God's providential plan for my life. God's got a plan for our lives. Sometimes people try to drive a wedge between being a Christian and doing or living the Christian life. And these things they're distinct, but it seems to me that if you've got a godly heart, if you are a godly person, it will work itself out in godly actions. And if you're living a godly life, then it is probably it's certainly because that life is flowing from a godly heart. So we need to be careful we don't make that distinction more than it actually is. When I talk about intentional, I mean purposeful, strategic, deliberate, planned, tactical. There's a passive kind of godliness that says, well, I'm going to avoid evil so that I, but that's what the Pharisees did, right? Intentional godliness takes the initiative. It dreams, it plans about how things might be made right. And it seems to me in Ruth chapter 3 that we see in Naomi and in Ruth and in Boaz, 3 people pursuing intentional godliness. And it might not seem like that at first reading. You might think, well, no, I don't see that. But hopefully by the end of this message, you will see how that worked. Naomi was really, really encouraged when Ruth came back with tons of grain. When she came back with the news that Boaz had welcomed her and had given her permission to glean in his fields right to the end of the harvest season. She was excited about it, and she was excited about it for 2 reasons. She was excited about it because it meant that they were going to be okay for food. That was important. That was good. But more than that, she was excited about it because she saw that it might be that her dear husband and her dear sons, who all had died, that their names might be redeemed. Remember last time we read in chapter 2, verse 20, where she said that the Lord has been good, the Lord has been kind through Boaz, The Lord hasn't forsaken the living or the dead. Now, the living, well, that was about her having enough food to eat. But what about the dead? What did it mean that God hadn't forsaken the dead? Well, there was a custom in Israel that every family had a plot of land that was their land, and it was to be passed down from generation to generation. This was really important. There's all sorts of rules and regulations about it. And even if you sold that to somebody else because you were short of money, in the year of Jubilee, your family got that land back. It was a really important part. Now, what happened if a family had its plot of land, but then there were no children? What would happen to that land? And that's the issue that was at stake. So it was considered, shameful is maybe too strong, but it was considered like dishonoring that this family wasn't able to pass their land on. And so what they had was a system of a rule, if you will, that meant that if a woman was left as a widow with no children, then her husband's closest relative had a responsibility to redeem her. And that responsibility would mean marrying her, stepping in, raising up children, but raising up children in the dead man's name. Right? So that and this would preserve the family name, the family inheritance. It wasn't just a legal duty. This was an act of love. It was an act of covenant loyalty under God. And so Naomi is excited about Boaz coming onto the scene because she's thinking, well, maybe he's interested in marrying Ruth. She knew that he was a redeemer, that he was a close family member. But she had another concern, Naomi. She wasn't just concerned about Elimelech's name. She was also concerned about Ruth herself. And she went to Ruth and she said, Ruth, I want you to have rest. I want you to have rest. There's something, it seems to me throughout Scripture, about the role of a husband that will lead to a godly woman and a godly man. A role of a godly husband is to bring a sense of safety and protection and kindness to his wife in such a way that she will feel at rest. She'll feel safe. And I just want to say to any husbands here, if you ever get into a situation where you find that you're getting nagged a lot, or you're finding that your wife's not happy, one of the first things you need to do is you need to ask yourself, am I providing my wife with rest? Am I providing my wife with that that genuine safety and security on which she can thrive? And that's one of the first questions that you need to ask in those kinds of a situation. So Naomi, she's excited, but you know what? Time has gone by, and she's beginning to think, well, have I misread the situation? Is Boaz really interested? And so she comes up with a plan to try and move things on, right? As mother-in-laws often tend to do. And so she has a plan, and she develops this plan. Now, just the very fact that she develops a plan to try and draw out godliness is incredibly instructive. At the end of chapter 1, you almost think Naomi is a helpless victim. She can't seem to see anything positive to do. But by the end of chapter 2 and into chapter 3, she's no longer a helpless victim. She's the hope that God has given to her is now turning into faith, and she's beginning to see a way forward. That's exciting. There's a great verse a few verses in 1 Peter chapter 1. And I'd like us just to read these, because I think becoming holy, becoming godly, becoming a godly man, becoming a godly woman, it's something we prepare for. It's something that we can plan for. In verse 13 of 1 Peter 1, it says, therefore, listen, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as he called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. Holiness doesn't just happen, folks. Holiness, according to this passage, starts by you preparing your mind for action. Intentional planning. And I don't know what that might look like for you. I remember reading, I think it was in a Charles Swindoll book years ago. I remember reading a story, and he was talking about counseling a man, and this man had he struggled with gluttony, and when he was driving home every night, he would stop off at a Ben and Jerry's ice cream shop or something on the way home, and he couldn't prevent it. He couldn't stop it. He said, I leave the office, I'm like, I'm not going to do it today. I'm not going to have that extra ice cream. I don't need it. And he gets to the shop and he sees it there and he puts the indicator on, stops and goes and gets the ice cream. And Swindoll said to him, is there another way you can drive home? There's nothing wrong with planning for godliness, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's a totally appropriate thing. And that, it seems to me, is exactly what Naomi does. She says to Ruth, she says, here's the plan. First of all, I want you to have a bath. In other words, don't smell. Then, I want you to put on your oils, which will make you smell good. Then, I want you to put on your simla, your cloak. A warm outer cloak that would keep somebody warm at night. Now, why? There's more to Naomi's plan. We'll come to that in a minute. But why did Naomi do this? Well, it's important to understand she wasn't saying to Ruth, get yourself all dolled up so that when you go and see Boaz, you know, he'll not be able to resist you. That's not what's going on here. What she's doing instead is she's basically sending a signal to Boaz. She's saying, Boaz might not be making any moves because he thinks you're still in mourning for Chilion. And because he thinks you're still in mourning for Chilion, he's not going to make any move for you. So what I want you to do is I want you to have a bath, put the oils on, put on your cloak, and then go. And that will make it clear to him that you're no longer in mourning. So that was what that was. That basically you're saying, Boaz, if you've been moving slowly out of respect for my mourning, I want you to know that season's past. The fourth part of our plan, go down to the threshing floor because that's where Boaz will be tonight. Then the fifth part is note where Boaz lies down when he goes to bed. Then number 6, once he's asleep, uncover his feet and lie down at his feet. And then number 7, wait for Boaz's instructions. That was the plan. Now, what are we to make of this? The Hebrew text is full of ambiguities. And basically, the way that the writer of Ruth has done this is that he's basically encouraging us, he's inviting us to wrestle with this passage. What's going on here? Well, one thing is clear. This was Naomi's plan was designed to prompt Boaz to act as kinsman redeemer, in other words, to marry Ruth. But the more puzzling question is, well, why doesn't she just go down and say it? Why this rigmarole? Why this dramatic method? Rather than a simple conversation. Well, there might be a clue, and we'll come back to that in a minute, about why she did it that way. But Naomi understood that there were 3 possible outcomes. There was the outcome that Boaz would take advantage of the situation and yield to temptation. But Naomi reckoned that was pretty unlikely because she knew Boaz and she knew his character and his integrity. The second option would be that he would view this action as forward and that he would say, get out of here and don't come back. But again, she thought, nah, I don't think he's going to do that either. And then the third option, the third outcome would be that he would understand what was happening. That just as he had sent signals that seemed to suggest he was interested in being Ruth's kinsman redeemer, that this signal he would pick up. And so what she's trying to do is she's trying to draw out that intentional godliness from Boaz through her plan. Ruth wasn't sure at first. It sounded a bit risky. It's not the kind of thing you would do in Moab. You would be in big trouble. But the more she thought about it, the more she thought, well, do you know what? I do need to send a signal to Boaz. And maybe Naomi's right. Maybe this is the best way. And so Ruth does what her mother-in-law suggested. She has a bath and she puts on her oils and she puts on the cloak and she goes down to the threshing floor and she notes where Boaz goes to sleep. And then when he's sleeping, she goes and she uncovers his feet and she lies down at his feet. And she does all of that, and she does it all with a kind of with a willingness. And about midnight, Boaz awakes, and he talks to her, and she just blurts it all out, and she basically proposes marriage to Boaz. She says, spread your wings over me. She uses the word kanaf. It's a word that she'd grown to love. It had two meanings. It meant wings. That was its main meaning. So the wings of a bird. But it was used of like the ends of a robe, the kind of corners of a robe. And it was used symbolically of a man marrying a woman. It would be said that he would spread his kanaf over a woman. It was a well-understood picture of taking a wife. It was a public protection, a public pledge of protection and covenant faithfulness. And so when Ruth says to him, spread your wings over me, she's basically saying, I want to be your wife. I want you to commit to me. I want you to commit covenant faithfulness, lifelong faithfulness to me. But the interesting thing is, kanaf also means wings. Now, the word kanaf only appears one other time in our book. And I wonder, some of you who were here last week, you might remember in verse 12, we looked at this in a bit of detail, where Boaz says to Ruth, the Lord repay you for what you have done. A full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose kanaf you have come to take refuge. There, Boaz told Ruth that she had come under the protection of the wings of Israel. He acted as God's agent, giving her that protection and that provision and that kindness. So when Ruth went back and she explained all this to Naomi and they were discussing it, they got to the point, well, Boaz was basically saying, because you've taken refuge under God's wings, you're exactly the kind of woman that I want to cover with my own wings. But you see, it's not easy for a middle-aged man to express a romantic interest in a younger widow. So Boaz said, well, he admired her for taking refuge under God's wings. He acted as if he wanted to be those wings for her. And then he waited. And Ruth came to this very place where she had received his provision and protection. And she's basically saying yes. A woman proposing to a man. A servant proposing to her master. A Moabite proposing to a pure Israelite. I can imagine Ruth's heart racing as she lay there at his feet, having blurted it out. Will he understand? Will he get it? Will he think badly of me? Her heart was racing. There was a long electric silence while Boaz processed what was going on. He knew she was a noble woman. He knew Naomi wasn't immoral. He knew he'd been sending her these quiet, profound signals. A middle-aged man in love communicates his desire to be God's protective wings for her the best way he knows how. And the young widow reads between the lines, risks misunderstanding by coming at night to take refuge under the corner of his garments. There are liberal scholars who make this disgusting. And I think it's just, they don't want a threshing floor to mean a threshing floor. They don't want feet to mean feet. They just make it horrible and ugly. And yet, read properly, this is one of the most beautiful chapters in the whole of the Bible. It's love in action. And it's drawing out intentional godliness. There's a saying among con men, not that I'm a con man, I don't know how I found this out. Anyway, there's a saying among con men, and it says, you can't rob an honest man. You cannot con an honest man. The only way you can con somebody is if they want some kind of illegal or immoral gain, and you can play on that. And the positive of that is it takes a godly man to recognize a godly woman. Boaz woke with a start. Something didn't feel right. His feet were colder than they would normally be, and the bed seemed a little bit lopsided. And he wasn't quite sure what was going on, and so he looked up and he opened his eyes, and there was a woman lying at the end of his bed. His initial thought was, oh, this is some prostitute come to get some business. She said, who are you? He said, who are you? And the woman at the end of his bed replies and says, it's Ruth. And he knows Ruth because he's already embraced her. He's already welcomed her into his employment. And he said that. And so he praises her. And then she basically comes back to him and she proposes marriage. She says, take me under your wings. And Boaz, he thinks about it for a minute, and then he realizes, wow, this young woman, she could have gone after a young guy. She could have gone after somebody richer than me. She could have gone after somebody who maybe, would be a bit more interesting for her. But she's come after me because I'm the one, as her kinsman redeemer, who can honor and exalt the name of her husband and her father-in-law. And she's laid aside all those other things so that she can redeem the name of her husband. And he is so impressed. And he honors her for that. Then he tells her that he's been looking into it, that he has been interested all along. Boaz shares with her, look, there's a problem. I would love to redeem you. I'd love to become your husband. But there's a closer relative. You see, the rule we talked about earlier about kinsman redeemer, the closest relative had the first option. And so Boaz says, but there is somebody with a greater claim to redeem you. And I'm going to have to talk to him and offer you to him first. I used to play golf. I used to watch a lot of golf. And back when I was watching golf, there was a player called Ray Floyd. And Ray Floyd, he was a kind of big American guy. And he was a really good golfer. And he was in the middle of a big competition, hundreds of thousands of pounds at stake, or dollars in prize money. He goes up to his ball, and he's got a 9-inch putt. Now, a 9-inch putt is known in golf as a gimme. It's so close that if you were playing, if you're playing against another guy, then he might just say, that's a gimme, just take it. So you wouldn't even have to putt it. But because he was playing in stroke play, where it was the number of shots rather than you playing against someone else, he had to putt this little putt. He goes up to the putt, and he goes up to putt the ball into the hole, just to tap it in. And as he addresses the ball, he notices that the ball moved a tiny bit. Now, back then, I don't know if it's still the case, but back then, there was a rule in golf that once you addressed the ball, if it moved even the smallest amount, it was a penalty stroke. And Ray Floyd saw this ball move. Nobody else saw it. There were no cameras. It's not like now where there's cameras at every angle. Nobody saw it. He could have got away with it. And he stepped back, and he said, the ball moved. The penalty stroke. Wow. That's integrity. That's integrity. And Boaz could quite easily just have quickly taken Ruth off and gone, like, let's get married, let's go to Gretna Green and make it all happen. He could easily have done something like that. But he had done his research, and he knew there was somebody in front of him. And so he went and he said, look, we need to do this right. Integrity is a very powerful thing, guys. It carries an inner strength that others will be able to see and will be able to trust. There is power in a man or woman of integrity. Not the kind of power that lords over people, but the kind of power that influences others. People think, why is he so different? What is it about her that makes me just want to share my soul with her? Well, what is it about him that makes me value his advice? Why do I want to be more like her in the way that I treat others? And yet, even while honoring the rules, Boaz says to her, look, if he doesn't take you, I will. You will be redeemed, one way or the other. And he gives her that assurance. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to suggest to you, in Ruth chapter 3, we do not see random events playing out. We do not see manipulative mother-in-laws and gambling widows taking immoral risks. Rather, what we see are 3 godly people seeking in a lovely and profound way, with a deep picture of love, pursuing intentional godliness. Naomi, well, she plans it. And Ruth, well, she takes the risk. And Boaz, he acts with integrity. Intentional godliness. Maybe you're thinking, how? How does that happen? And the first thing that I want you to know, I wonder if the band would go up now and just get ready to lead us in a song. Maybe you're thinking, well, how? How is that going to happen? Where is it going to happen? What is that going to look like for me? Well, I want to say one thing. Before we come around the Lord's table, I want you to know without a shadow of a doubt that it is found only in Jesus Christ. And that Jesus Christ is our kinsman redeemer. Jesus Christ became a human being. God the Son coming down into the world and becoming a human being. That is not just a theological nicety. If he did not become a human being, he could not be your kinsman. He could not pay for your sin. But he's also your redeemer. He didn't just come into the world to identify with you as your kinsman. He came to redeem you. And we know what that cost him. That cost him his death on the cross. It cost him his life. It cost him that anguish and separation from God the Father. And now, the Lord Jesus Christ, your kinsman redeemer, is the divine bridegroom who pursues his people with relentless love. He's come to set us free from sin and shame. He's come to meet our deepest needs as we take refuge under his wings. And it's only as we are united with him that we will ever be able to pursue intentional godliness with joy and power. I'm going to read some words about that in a moment as we prepare for the Lord's Supper. But first, let's stand together and let's worship him in song.